The sun beat down mercilessly on the Sacramento Valley as the stagecoach rattled along the dusty trail toward Chico, California. Sophia Hayes clutched her reticule tightly, her knuckles white against the dark leather. The year was 1873, and she was finally making the journey west to claim the inheritance her late uncle had left her, a small but promising plot of land just outside the growing town of Chico. The coach hit a particularly deep rut, sending her petite frame bouncing against the wooden seat. "Not much further now, madam," the driver called down. "We'll be crossing Miller's Creek in about an hour, then it's just a straight shot to Chico." Sophia nodded, though she knew the driver couldn't see her. The other passengers, a sleeping elderly gentleman and a nervous-looking young man clutching a leather portfolio, paid her no mind. She turned her attention back to the window, watching as the golden hills rolled by, dotted with oak trees that provided scant shade against the California summer heat. She was mentally calculating how she would manage her uncle's property when the stagecoach suddenly lurched to a violent halt. Sophia was thrown forward, barely catching herself against the opposite seat. "Whoa there!" the driver shouted, his voice tinged with alarm. The nervous young man's eyes went wide. "What's happening?" Before anyone could respond, a gruff voice rang out. "This here's a robbery. Everybody out, hands where I can see 'em." Sophia's heart hammered in her chest as she heard the unmistakable click of revolvers being cocked. The elderly gentleman awoke with a start, confusion clouding his weathered face. "I said everybody out," the voice demanded again. The stagecoach door was wrenched open, revealing three men with bandanas pulled up over their faces, their eyes cold beneath the brims of dusty hats. One of them, clearly the leader, gestured with his revolver. "Ladies first," he sneered, his eyes fixing on Sophia. With trembling legs she descended from the coach, squinting in the harsh sunlight. The driver and shotgun guard had already been forced to the ground, their weapons confiscated. "Now this can go easy or hard," the leader announced, circling the group like a predator. "Valuables in the bag and nobody gets hurt." One of the bandits thrust a canvas sack toward Sophia. She hesitated, clutching her reticule. "That too, miss," the man growled. "All of it." "Please," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "This contains all I have to start my new life." The leader laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "That's touching, truly, but your new life just got postponed." With a rough motion, he snatched the reticule from her hands. Sophia watched in despair as her money, pocket watch, and the deed to her uncle's property disappeared into the bag. "Check the luggage," the leader ordered his companions. The bandits made quick work of the trunks strapped to the top of the coach, tossing clothing and personal effects carelessly to the ground as they searched for valuables. Sophia's carefully packed trunk was among them, her modest possessions now scattered in the dirt. The nervous young man made a sudden move toward his portfolio, and one of the bandits reacted instantly, bringing the butt of his gun down on the man's head. He crumpled to the ground with a pained groan. "Anybody else feeling heroic?" the leader asked, his eyes scanning the remaining passengers. No one moved. The robbery continued with brutal efficiency, the bandits taking everything of value: watches, jewelry, money, even the driver's boots. "What about the horses?" one of the bandits asked. "Take 'em," the leader replied. "They'll fetch a good price in Sacramento." Sophia watched in horror as they began unhitching the team. Without the horses, they would be stranded miles from the nearest town. "You can't leave us here," the elderly gentleman protested. "It's miles to anywhere," the leader merely laughed. "Start walking then, old-timer." Consider it good exercise. With practiced efficiency, the bandits mounted their own horses and led away the stagecoach team. The leader tipped his hat mockingly. "Much obliged for your contributions, folks. May you have a pleasant journey onward on foot." Their laughter lingered in the air as they disappeared over the ridge, leaving the passengers and coach crew standing helplessly in the middle of the dusty trail. "Damn outlaws," the driver spat, helping the young man to his feet. A trickle of blood ran down his temple where he'd been struck. "Third robbery this month along this stretch. What do we do now?" Sophia asked, the reality of their situation sinking in. The driver squinted at the sun. "It's at least 15 miles to Chico from here. With night coming on and no water to speak of, we're in a tight spot." "Perhaps we could wait for another coach," the elderly gentleman suggested. The shotgun guard shook his head. "Next scheduled coach isn't for 3 days, and no guarantee any travelers will pass this way before then." The gravity of their situation settled over the group like a heavy blanket. The California summer sun showed no mercy, and they had limited supplies. The driver distributed what little water remained among them, but it wouldn't last long. "We should start walking," he finally said. "If we stick to the road, we might make it to Miller's Creek by nightfall. There's a way station there." Sophia gathered what remained of her possessions, trying to salvage what she could from her scattered trunk. Her heart sank as she realized her mother's locket was missing, likely now in the bandits' possession. It was the last memento she had of her family. They had been walking for perhaps an hour, the sun beginning its westward descent, when Sophia spotted a cloud of dust on the horizon. At first, she feared the bandits were returning, but as the figure grew closer, she could make out a single rider approaching at a steady pace. "Hello there," the driver called out, waving his arms. "We need assistance." The rider slowed and then guided his horse toward their bedraggled group. As he drew near, Sophia could see he was a tall man with broad shoulders, his face partially shadowed by his wide-brimmed hat. A rifle was secured to his saddle, and a revolver hung at his hip. His clothing was trail-worn but neat denims, a faded blue shirt, and a leather vest. Unlike the bandits, his face was uncovered, revealing a strong jawline shadowed with several days' growth of beard. "Looks like you folks are in a spot of trouble," he observed, his voice deep and measured. "Stagecoach robbery," the driver explained quickly. "They took everything, including our team." The rider's expression darkened. "The Patterson gang, most likely. They've been hitting coaches all through this territory." He dismounted in a fluid motion, revealing his impressive height. Sophia estimated he stood at least 6 feet tall. He removed his hat, exposing sun-streaked brown hair and piercing blue eyes that assessed the situation with calm efficiency. "Patrick Nash," he introduced himself with a slight nod. "I was heading to Chico myself." The driver made quick introductions. When he came to Sophia, Nash's eyes lingered on her face for a moment longer than necessary. "Miss Hayes," he acknowledged with a respectful incline of his head. "Mr. Nash," she returned, finding her voice. "We're most grateful for your timely arrival." He ran a hand along his horse's neck, his expression thoughtful. "My horse can't carry everyone, and Miller's Creek is still a good 10 miles off." He seemed to come to a decision, his eyes returning to Sophia. "Miss Hayes, you look to be in the worst shape of the lot. The heat's taking its toll." Sophia wanted to protest. She prided herself on her resilience, but she couldn't deny the weakness in her limbs and the throbbing behind her eyes. The California heat was unlike anything she'd experienced in her native Pennsylvania. "I propose this," Nash continued. "Miss Hayes rides Ember here to the creek. There's a way station where she can send back help for the rest of you. I'll walk alongside to guide her. You'd give up your horse?" The young man asked incredulously. Nash shrugged. "Seems the decent thing to do." The driver nodded gratefully. "We'd be much obliged, Mr. Nash. The lady surely needs it most." Sophia felt a flush creep up her neck, partly from embarrassment at being singled out, partly from the heat. "I couldn't possibly. "You can and you will," Nash interrupted firmly but not unkindly. "No sense in all of us suffering when there's a solution at hand." Before she could protest further, he was adjusting his saddle and helping her mount. Sophia had ridden before, but side saddle in proper lady's attire. Nash seemed to sense her discomfort. "Embers gentle as they come," he assured her. "Just hold the reins loose and let her follow me." With that settled, Nash gathered a few essential supplies from his saddlebags, transferred them to a smaller pack he slung over his shoulder, and handed his canteen up to Sophia. "Small sips," he instructed. "We've got a ways to go yet." The rest of the party would continue at their own pace, with Nash's assurance that help would be sent back from Miller's Creek as soon as possible. With final words of encouragement, Nash took Ember's reins and began leading her along the trail, his long strides eating up the ground despite the heat. For a time they traveled in silence, Sophia acutely aware of the privilege she'd been granted while the others trudged on foot behind them, gradually disappearing from view as Nash's pace outdistanced theirs. "I feel terribly selfish," she finally said, breaking the silence. Nash glanced up at her, a hint of amusement in his eyes. "Nothing selfish about survival, Miss Hayes. The others understand. Still, you've given up your mount and are walking miles in this heat for a complete stranger." He shrugged, his pace never faltering. "Would have had to slow down for the others anyway. This way, at least one of you gets to safety quicker and help can be sent back." His logic was sound, but Sophia still felt a pang of guilt. "May I ask what brings you to Chico, Mr. Nash?" "Work," he replied simply. Then, seeming to realize his brevity might appear rude, he elaborated. "I was a ranch foreman down near Sacramento. Got word of a position opening up on the Carter spread outside Chico." "You're a cattleman then," he nodded. "Since I was old enough to throw a rope." "My father ran cattle in Texas before the war." Sophia found herself curious about this man who had so casually come to their rescue. "And what of your family now?" A shadow crossed his face. "Lost Pa in '65. Ma followed a few years later. Brothers running a store in Oregon Territory last I heard." "I'm sorry for your losses," she said softly. Nash acknowledged her sympathy with a slight nod. "Life out here has a way of taking as much as it gives. What brings you to Chico, if I might ask?" Sophia hesitated, then decided there was no harm in sharing her circumstances. "My uncle, Samuel Hayes, passed away 3 months ago. He left me his property near Chico, a small homestead, I'm told. I was coming to claim it and start a new life." "Samuel Hayes," Nash repeated, recognition in his voice. "Had land along Butt Creek, didn't he?" "Kept mostly to himself, but was fair in his dealings." Sophia nodded, surprised. "You knew him?" "Of him," Nash clarified. "Helped drive some cattle through his northern pasture once. Decent man." "I never had the chance to meet him," Sophia admitted. "He and my father had a falling out years ago." The inheritance came as quite a surprise. Nash was quiet for a moment, seeming to consider something. "That land's good country. Plenty of water, decent grazing. You planning to work it yourself?" The question gave Sophia pause. In truth, she hadn't fully formed a plan beyond claiming the property. After her parents' deaths from influenza 2 years prior, teaching at the local school in her Pennsylvania hometown had provided modest income but little fulfillment. The inheritance had seemed like Providence, a chance to start fresh. "I haven't decided," she answered honestly. "I have some savings, or had before the robbery. I thought perhaps to assess the property and then determine whether to sell or—" She trailed off, the enormity of her situation hitting her anew. Nash seemed to sense her distress. "The deed to the property, was it among your stolen possessions?" Sophia nodded miserably. "Along with nearly all my money and my mother's locket." Nash's jaw tightened. The Patterson gang has a habit of selling documents like that back to their rightful owners at a steep price. I have nothing left to pay them with, Sophia said, despair creeping into her voice. There are other ways to establish ownership, Nash assured her. The land office in Chico will have records of your uncle's property, and as for money, he hesitated. Chico's a growing town. A woman of education could find employment. Sophia straightened slightly in the saddle. I was a teacher back east. There you have it, Nash said with a hint of a smile. Chico's got a proper school now. Always need teachers in these parts. His words provided a small comfort. Perhaps all was not lost after all. As they continued their journey, the landscape began to change subtly. The rolling golden hills gave way to scattered trees, and in the distance, Sophia could make out the dark line that suggested a creek cutting through the valley. Miller's Creek, Nash confirmed, following her gaze. Another hour and we'll reach the way station. The sun was beginning to set, painting the western sky in brilliant oranges and reds. Despite her predicament, Sophia couldn't help but admire the wild beauty of California. It was so different from the lush green hills of Pennsylvania, harsher perhaps, but with a stark grandeur that stirred something within her. It's beautiful country, she murmured. Nash glanced up at her, then followed her gaze to the sunset. That it is. Unforgiving at times, but beautiful nonetheless. They fell into a companionable silence as they made their way toward the creek. Sophia found herself studying her rescuer as he walked steadily beside the horse. There was an easy competence to his movements, a man comfortable in his own skin and in this rugged landscape. His face, though weathered by sun and wind, suggested he was not much older than her own 24 years, perhaps 30 at most. When they finally reached Miller's Creek, the way station came into view, a sturdy wooden structure with a stable attached and a corral for stock. Smoke rose from the chimney, and a lantern glowed in the window, welcoming in the gathering dusk. Nash helped Sophia dismount, his hands strong and steady at her waist. For a brief moment they stood close, and Sophia became acutely aware of his height and the breadth of his shoulders. She stepped back quickly, smoothing her travel-wrinkled skirt. Thank you, Mr. Nash. I don't know what would have become of us if you hadn't come along. He acknowledged her thanks with a slight nod. Let's get inside and arrange for help to be sent back for the others. The way station was operated by a grizzled older couple, the Millers, who gave their name to the creek. They were alarmed to hear of the robbery but not surprised. Third one this month, Mr. Miller grumbled, echoing the stagecoach driver's earlier assessment. Sheriff Dawson's been trying to track that gang down, but they're slippery as eels. We need to send someone back for the others, Nash explained. They're on foot about 10 miles east, Miller nodded. My boy can ride out with a wagon. They'll be here by midnight, most likely. While arrangements were made, Mrs. Miller showed Sophia to a small but clean room where she could rest and freshen up. Not often we get lady guests, the older woman said kindly. I've put out some clean towels and there's water in the pitcher. Supper will be ready shortly. Left alone, Sophia sank onto the narrow bed, the events of the day catching up to her. She allowed herself a moment of despair. Everything she had brought with her, money, clothes, personal items, and most importantly, the deed to her uncle's property, was gone. She was in a strange place, dependent on the kindness of strangers. Yet, as she washed her face and hands in the cool water Mrs. Miller had provided, Sophia felt a resolve building within her. She had come west to start anew, and obstacles were to be expected. Her education was something no bandit could steal, and if Nash was right about the need for teachers in Chico, she could support herself while sorting out the matter of her uncle's property. When she emerged for supper, she found Nash seated at the rough wooden table, deep in conversation with Miller about the Patterson gang's recent activities. He rose politely when she entered, pulling out a chair for her. "Miss Hayes, I hope you were able to rest a bit." "Thank you, yes," she replied, taking the offered seat. "And I've been thinking about what you said regarding employment in Chico." Nash nodded encouragingly as Mrs. Miller began serving a hearty stew and freshly baked bread. "If there truly is need for a teacher, I believe I could secure such a position while I sort out the matter of my uncle's property." "There's always need for learning in these parts," Miller confirmed, joining them at the table. "Town's growing fast with the railroad coming through. Lots of families settling now." Nash broke off a piece of bread. "Miller's Creek isn't much more than a way station, but Chico's becoming a proper town. Sawmills, flour mill, even talk of a college someday." The conversation turned to the development of the region, with Miller providing a history of the area since the gold rush days. Sophia found herself genuinely interested, asking questions about the town that might soon become her home. Throughout the meal, she was aware of Nash's quiet presence across the table. He spoke little but listened intently. Occasionally their eyes would meet, and she would feel a curious flutter in her chest before quickly looking away. As they were finishing their meal, the sound of horses announced the return of young Miller with the wagon. The rest of the stagecoach party had been found and would arrive shortly. "We should reach Chico by mid-morning tomorrow if we leave at first light," Nash informed Sophia as they stepped onto the porch to watch the wagon approach. "I've arranged to accompany you and the others." "You've already done so much," Sophia protested. "Surely you need to reach your own destination." "Chico is my destination," he reminded her with a slight smile, "and I find I'm curious to see how your situation resolves." Something in his steady gaze made Sophia's heart beat a little faster. "Well then, I suppose I should thank you for your continued assistance." Nash tipped his hat slightly. "No thanks necessary, Miss Hayes. We're heading the same way is all." But Sophia suspected there was more to it than that. There was a watchfulness in his manner that suggested he felt some responsibility toward her. Whether it was merely gentlemanly concern or something more, she couldn't say. The wagon arrived with the exhausted travelers, who were grateful for the rescue. The young man's head had been bandaged by the driver, but otherwise they had suffered nothing worse than fatigue and thirst. After a hasty meal, they all retired to rest before the morning journey. Sophia lay awake in her small room, listening to the night sounds of the California wilderness, so different from the familiar noises of her Pennsylvania home. Crickets chirped, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled at the rising moon. Despite the uncertainty of her circumstances, she felt a strange sense of anticipation. Tomorrow she would see Chico, learn more about her uncle's property, and perhaps begin to carve out a new life for herself. And she admitted to herself as sleep finally claimed her. She would have another day in the company of the intriguing Patrick Nash. Dawn came early at Miller's Creek, the first light of day filtering through the simple muslin curtains of Sophia's room. She dressed quickly in her rumpled traveling clothes, the only outfit she now possessed, and made her way to the main room of the way station where breakfast was being served. Nash was already there, his hat resting on the bench beside him as he spoke quietly with Miller over coffee. He stood when Sophia entered, a gesture of courtesy that seemed natural rather than forced. "Miss Hayes," he greeted her, "I trust you slept well." "As well as could be expected, thank you," she replied, accepting the cup of coffee Mrs. Miller offered. "When do we depart for Chico?" "Within the hour," Nash informed her. "The wagon's being prepared now." The other passengers gradually joined them, all looking somewhat recovered after a night's rest. The driver, Mr. Thompson, was particularly eager to reach Chico and report the robbery to the sheriff. "Those Patterson boys need to be brought to justice," he declared, spooning sugar into his coffee. "They've terrorized this route long enough." "Sheriff Dawson's a good man," Miller commented, "but he's short-handed and the county's vast. Hard to track men who know the backcountry as well as the Pattersons." Nash remained quiet during this exchange, but Sophia noticed a certain tension in his shoulders at the mention of the outlaw gang. She wondered if he had some personal history with them beyond what he'd shared. After breakfast, they loaded into Miller's wagon. The vehicle was crowded with the addition of the stagecoach passengers, but they arranged themselves as comfortably as possible for the journey. Nash rode alongside on Ember, occasionally scouting ahead or dropping back to ensure they weren't being followed. The road to Chico followed Miller's Creek for several miles before cutting across rolling grasslands dotted with majestic valley oaks. As they traveled, Nash pointed out landmarks to Sophia, who found herself increasingly drawn to his quiet confidence and knowledge of the land. "Your uncle's property lies about 3 miles southeast of town," he told her as they paused to rest the horses at midday. "Good water rights, decent grazing land. He ran some cattle and grew wheat, if I recall correctly." "You seem to know a great deal about it," Sophia observed. Nash shrugged. "Cattle business means knowing the land and who owns what. Your uncle kept to himself mostly, but his reputation was solid." "I wish I had known him," Sophia said softly. "All I have are a few letters he exchanged with my mother years ago." "Family's complicated out here," Nash replied, his eyes scanning the horizon in a habit Sophia had noticed was constant with him, always watching, always aware. "Distance changes people, sometimes for the better." There was something in his tone that suggested personal experience, but before Sophia could inquire further, Thompson called that it was time to continue their journey. As they approached Chico, the landscape changed again. Stands of oak gave way to cultivated fields, and in the distance, the beginnings of a proper town took shape. Sophia could make out the spire of a church, the substantial form of a mill, and clusters of buildings that suggested a growing community. "Chico was founded back in '60, Nash explained as they drew closer. "General Bidwell laid it out after making his fortune in the gold fields. It's becoming the center of trade for the upper Sacramento Valley." Sophia took in the scene with growing interest. The town was larger than she had expected, with several streets of substantial buildings and many more under construction. "There's the school," Nash pointed out as they passed a neat white building with a bell tower. "And the land office is on Main Street, where you'll need to go about your uncle's property." They entered the town proper, the wagon drawing curious looks from townspeople going about their business. Thompson directed them to the sheriff's office, a modest building adjacent to the small jail. Sheriff Dawson was a tall, lean man with a salt and pepper mustache and observant eyes. He listened gravely to Thompson's account of the robbery, taking notes and asking pointed questions about the outlaw's appearance and behavior. "Sounds like the Patterson gang, all right," he confirmed. "Been hitting stages all through the territory. Got a couple deputies out tracking them now, but they're slippery." He turned his attention to Sophia. "Miss Hayes, I understand they took your deed and personal effects." "Yes, Sheriff," she replied. "Everything I brought with me, including proof of my inheritance." Dawson nodded sympathetically. "We'll do what we can to recover your property, but I won't make promises I can't keep. In the meantime, I suggest you visit the land office. They'll have records of your uncle's property that can verify your claim." Nash, who had been standing quietly by the door, spoke up. "I'd be happy to accompany Miss Hayes to the land office, Sheriff. I'm familiar with the procedures." Dawson gave Nash an appraising look. Nash, isn't it? Heard you might be taking the foreman position out at Carter's place. That's the plan, Nash confirmed. Just arrived myself. The sheriff seemed satisfied with this. Good man, Carter. Miss Hayes could use a guide who knows his way around. The land office closes at 4, so you'd best get moving. Outside, the other passengers bid Sophia farewell, each continuing to their own destinations. Thompson assured her he would inform the stage company of the robbery, though she held little hope of recovering her possessions. Left alone with Nash, Sophia felt a momentary uncertainty. Mr. Nash, I don't wish to delay your own business in town. Surely you need to meet with Mr. Carter about your position. Carter's not expecting me until tomorrow, Nash replied easily. And I gave my word to see you settled. The land office first, then we should find you some lodging. Sophia hesitated, acutely aware of her lack of funds. I'm afraid the robbery has left me in a difficult position regarding accommodations. Nash considered this. There's a boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Fletcher. Respectable place, reasonable rates. She might be willing to extend credit until you're established, especially if we explain the circumstances. You seem to know a great deal about Chico for someone who's just arrived, Sophia observed as they walked along the busy main street. A hint of a smile crossed Nash's face. I've been through here a few times over the years. Town's grown, but some things stay the same. The land office was a tidy building with a large window displaying maps of available properties in the county. Inside, a clerk in sleeve garters looked up from his ledger as they entered. Afternoon, folks. What can I help you with today? Nash removed his hat. The lady needs to verify her ownership of a property. Her uncle, Samuel Hayes, passed recently and left her his land, but her deed was stolen in a stage robbery. The clerk's eyebrows rose. The Patterson gang again? Afraid so, Nash confirmed. The clerk shook his head sympathetically. Sorry to hear that, madam. Let me check the records for Hayes' property. He disappeared into a back room, returning shortly with a large ledger. Samuel Hayes. Yes, here it is. 160 acres along Butt Creek, registered in 1862. No mortgage, taxes paid through this year. He looked up at Sophia. You're the heir, you say? Yes, his niece. Sophia Hayes from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. You have any identification? Letters from your uncle, perhaps? Sophia felt her heart sink. Everything was taken in the robbery. I have nothing to prove who I am. The clerk frowned. That does present a problem. Without documentation. If I may, Nash interrupted smoothly. Sheriff Dawson is aware of Miss Hayes's situation and can vouch that she reported the robbery immediately upon arriving in town. Perhaps he could provide a statement while we wait for confirmation from Pennsylvania. The clerk considered this. The sheriff's word carries weight, certainly. And if you could obtain a letter from your family's attorney in Pennsylvania confirming the inheritance. I can write to our family lawyer immediately, Sophia assured him. In the meantime, Nash added, would it be possible for Miss Hayes to at least visit the property? To assess its condition? The clerk hesitated, then nodded. I don't see the harm in that, provided no legal decisions are made until her identity is confirmed. I can give you directions to the property. He sketched a rough map, marking the location of Samuel Hayes's homestead in relation to Chico. It's about 3 miles southeast, as the crow flies. Decent road most of the way, then a track leading to the house. The building was simple but solid, last I heard. Sophia studied the map, feeling a mix of anxiety and anticipation. The property that had drawn her across the country was tantalizingly close, yet still not securely hers. Thank you for your assistance, she told the clerk sincerely. Outside, the afternoon sun was beginning to slant toward the western horizon. Nash suggested they find lodging for Sophia before the day grew any later. The boarding house he had mentioned was a well-maintained two-story building with a wide front porch adorned with potted geraniums. Mrs. Fletcher proved to be a plump, practical woman in her 50s with shrewd eyes that assessed Sophia thoroughly. After hearing their explanation of the situation, she pursed her lips thoughtfully. "Robbery victims, are you? Those Patterson boys are a plague on this county." "Yes, madam," Sophia replied. "I find myself in rather desperate circumstances until I can establish my claim to my uncle's property." Mrs. Fletcher's expression softened slightly. Samuel Hayes was a decent sort, kept to himself mostly, but always paid his bills prompt and was respectful to womenfolk. She studied Sophia a moment longer. "I've a small room available. It's not fancy, mind you, but it's clean and safe." "I would be most grateful," Sophia said earnestly. "And I assure you, once I've sorted out my affairs, you'll be paid in full." Mrs. Fletcher nodded decisively. "Mr. Nash here vouches for you, and he's got a reputation for straight dealing. I'll need you to sign the register and we'll work out terms once you're settled." Relief washed over Sophia. "Thank you, Mrs. Fletcher. Your kindness is most appreciated." The older woman waved away her thanks. "There's supper at 6 sharp. Don't be late or you'll go hungry till breakfast." After signing the register, Sophia turned to Nash, who had remained respectfully silent during the negotiations. "Mr. Nash, I don't know how to thank you properly. You've gone far beyond what any stranger might reasonably do." Nash shifted slightly, appearing almost uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Just doing what needed doing, Miss Hayes. No more than that. Nevertheless, you've been extraordinarily kind. I hope I'll have the opportunity to repay your generosity someday." A hint of color touched his tan cheeks. "No repayment necessary. I was thinking if you're amenable I could take you out to see your uncle's property tomorrow morning. Best you know what you're dealing with." Sophia brightened at the suggestion. "I would like that very much, thank you. I'll call for you at 8 then." He settled his hat back on his head. "I should report to Carter now. Let him know I've arrived." Sophia watched him stride away down the street, a curious mixture of emotions stirring within her. In the span of a single day, Patrick Nash had gone from stranger to rescuer to guide, and she found herself inexplicably drawn to his quiet strength and integrity. Mrs. Fletcher appeared at her elbow. "That's a good man," she said matter-of-factly. "Not one for many words, but solid as they come." "You know him well?" Sophia asked, curious. "Known of him for years. He worked the big ranches down Valley Way. Got a reputation for fair dealing and standing his ground when needed." Mrs. Fletcher gave Sophia a shrewd look. "Now let me show you to your room so you can wash up before supper. You look dead on your feet, poor thing." The room was indeed small but spotlessly clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, a small wardrobe, and a chair by the window that overlooked the street. Sophia sank onto the bed, suddenly overwhelmed by the events of the past 2 days. "You'll be wanting to shop for some necessities, I expect," Mrs. Fletcher observed. "There's a mercantile down the street that carries ladies' things. Reasonable prices, too." "I'm afraid I have no money," Sophia admitted, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. "Mrs. Fletcher clucked her tongue sympathetically. "I'll advance you a small sum. You can add it to your account." Before Sophia could protest this additional kindness, the older woman continued, "And I may have some things that would fit you until you can get your own. My daughter left some dresses when she married and moved to Sacramento. Nothing fancy, but they'd serve until you're on your feet." Tears welled in Sophia's eyes at this unexpected generosity. "Mrs. Fletcher, I don't know what to say." "Say nothing, child. I've been in hard straits myself before. Town like this, we look after our own." She patted Sophia's shoulder. Rest a bit, then come down for supper. Things will look brighter with a good meal in you." Left alone, Sophia allowed herself a moment of release, tears flowing freely as the tension of the past days found outlet. Yet even as she wept, she recognized that her circumstances, while difficult, were far from hopeless. She had found kindness in this strange new place, and tomorrow she would see the property that had drawn her across the country. With that thought to sustain her, she washed her face, borrowed a clean dress from the selection Mrs. Fletcher had provided, and went downstairs to join the other boarders for supper. The dining room held a long table that could seat a dozen people, though only 8 places were set. As Sophia entered, 5 people were already seated, 2 middle-aged men who appeared to be salesmen or merchants, a young woman perhaps a few years younger than Sophia, an older woman with steel-gray hair pinned severely atop her head, and a gentleman in his 30s wearing spectacles and a neatly trimmed beard. Mrs. Fletcher made the introductions as she served a hearty meal of roast chicken, potatoes, and fresh bread. The young woman, Miss Porter, proved to be the assistant at the millinery shop. The older woman, Mrs. Graves, was the widow of a former town councilman. The bespectacled gentleman, Mr. Whitman, taught at the Chico school. This last introduction caught Sophia's immediate attention. "You're a teacher, Mr. Whitman." "I was a teacher myself in Pennsylvania." Whitman brightened noticeably. "Indeed. What subjects did you teach, Miss Hayes?" "Reading, writing, mathematics, geography, and history primarily. I had pupils ranging from 6 to 14 years of age." "How fascinating. We're in desperate need of qualified teachers here in Chico. The town is growing faster than our educational resources." He leaned forward eagerly. "Would you perhaps consider applying for a position? We're seeking someone for the younger students immediately." This unexpected opportunity sent a surge of hope through Sophia. "I would be most interested, Mr. Whitman. When might I inquire about the position formally?" "The school board meets tomorrow afternoon at 4. I'd be happy to introduce you." His enthusiasm was evident. A trained teacher from back east would be most welcome. "That's settled then," Mrs. Fletcher declared with satisfaction, passing the breadbasket. "Our Miss Hayes will soon be contributing to the betterment of Chico's youth." The conversation flowed easily after that, with the other boarders curious about Sophia's journey and sympathetic to her plight. They shared local news and gossip, providing her with a quick education on Chico's social landscape. By the time supper concluded, Sophia felt a growing sense of belonging. These people, strangers just hours ago, had welcomed her without reservation despite her unfortunate circumstances. She retired to her room that night with renewed optimism. Tomorrow she would see her uncle's property, apply for a teaching position, and perhaps begin to build the new life she had journeyed so far to find. Her last thoughts before drifting to sleep were of Patrick Nash and their planned excursion in the morning. The memory of his steady blue eyes and quiet strength followed her into dreams more peaceful than she might have expected after such tumultuous days. Morning dawned clear and already warm, promising another hot California day. Sophia rose early, washed and dressed in one of Mrs. Fletcher's daughter's gowns, a simple blue cotton that fit reasonably well though it was a bit loose in the waist. She pinned her dark hair up neatly, wishing for her missing hairbrush and pins but managing adequately with what Mrs. Fletcher had lent her. At precisely 8 o'clock, there was a knock at the boarding house door. Mrs. Fletcher answered it, and Sophia heard the murmur of voices before the landlady called up to her. Nash stood in the parlor, hat in hand. He had clearly made an effort with his appearance. His shirt was fresh, his face clean-shaven, and his boots polished. The transformation highlighted his handsome features, and Sophia felt a flutter of awareness that had nothing to do with their planned expedition. "Good morning, Miss Hayes," he greeted her, his deep voice carrying a warmth she hadn't noticed before. "I trust you slept well." "Very well, thank you," she replied, conscious of Mrs. Fletcher's observant presence. "I'm quite ready for our journey to my uncle's property." Nash nodded, seemingly pleased. "I've brought the wagon. It's a fair distance, and I thought you might appreciate the comfort over horseback." Outside, a sturdy wagon with 2 horses stood waiting. Nash helped Sophia up to the seat with careful hands before climbing up beside her and taking the reins. "I took the liberty of bringing some provisions," he mentioned as they set off down the main street. "Thought we might want to take our noon meal at the property." "That was thoughtful of you," Sophia said, touched by his consideration. They left Chico behind, following the road south before turning onto a less traveled track that led eastward toward the foothills. The landscape opened up around them, rolling golden grasslands dotted with majestic valley oaks, the distant Sierra Nevada mountains forming a dramatic backdrop. "It's beautiful," Sophia observed, taking in the vastness of the landscape. "So different from Pennsylvania." Nash glanced at her. "Takes some getting used to, I imagine. Pennsylvania's all green and close, isn't it?" "Yes, woods and hills and narrow valleys. Nothing this expansive. That's California for you. Makes a man or woman feel small, but in a good way. Puts things in perspective." They traveled in companionable silence for a time, the rhythmic clop of the horses' hooves and the creak of the wagon wheels the only sounds. Occasionally, Nash would point out a landmark or name a distant peak, and Sophia found herself appreciating his knowledge of the land. "There," he said finally, gesturing ahead where the road curved around a stand of oaks. "That's Hayes' land we're coming to now." Sophia felt her heart quicken as they crossed what was apparently the boundary of her uncle's property. The land rose gently here, with a creek cutting through it, its course marked by a line of cottonwoods and willows. In the distance, she could make out what appeared to be a house and outbuildings nestled in a small valley. "Oh," she breathed, a strange emotion tightening her throat. "It's lovely." Nash smiled, the expression transforming his serious face. "Your uncle chose well. Good water, good grazing, sheltered from the worst of the north winds in winter, land a person could build a life on." As they drew closer, Sophia could see that the house was modest but solid, a single-story structure built of timber with a covered porch across the front. A barn stood nearby, along with a corral, chicken coop, and what appeared to be a small orchard. Fields stretched away to the south, the stubble of harvested wheat still visible. Nash halted the wagon in the yard and helped Sophia down. For a moment, she simply stood there, taking it all in this place that was potentially hers, yet still strange to her. "Would you like to see inside?" Nash asked gently. Sophia nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. The house key was kept on a nail behind a loose board on the porch, country custom, Nash explained, and soon they were stepping into what had been Samuel Hayes's home. It was simpler than Sophia had expected, but neat and well-maintained. A main room with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen, and 2 bedrooms made up the entire structure. The furnishings were basic but serviceable: a table and chairs, a sofa, a rocking chair by the fire, beds and dressers in the bedrooms. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with volumes that suggested her uncle had been a reader. Sophia ran her fingers over the spines, finding works of history, poetry, and agriculture. "He read Wordsworth," she murmured, touching a worn volume of poetry. "Your uncle kept to himself, but folks said he was educated," Nash commented from the doorway. "Respected his privacy, so I never knew him well." Moving to the larger of the 2 bedrooms, Sophia found a desk with papers neatly stacked. Personal letters, account books, and agricultural records gave glimpses of the man who had lived here. In a drawer, she discovered a daguerreotype of a young couple, the woman bearing a striking resemblance to Sophia's mother. "This must be my mother and uncle when they were young," she said, showing the image to Nash. He studied it carefully. "You favor your mother," he observed. "Same eyes." Sophia felt a connection forming to this place and to the uncle she'd never known. Each object, each room revealed something new about Samuel Hayes and the life he had built here. "It needs a woman's touch," Nash remarked as they completed their tour of the house, "but it's solid. Good bones, as they say." "Yes," Sophia agreed, her mind already filling with possibilities. "It could be quite comfortable with some attention." They moved outside to inspect the outbuildings. The barn was well constructed, with stalls for horses, storage for hay, and a workshop area. The chicken coop stood empty but ready for new occupants. The orchard contained apple, pear, and plum trees, many still bearing fruit. "Your uncle kept a few cattle, grew wheat in that south field, and had a vegetable garden there by the creek," Nash explained as they walked the property. "Not a large operation, but self-sufficient. He hired help at harvest time from what I hear." "It's more than I expected," Sophia admitted. "I thought perhaps a small cottage, not all this." They paused by the creek, where willows dipped their branches into the clear water. Nash spread a blanket he'd brought from the wagon and set out the provisions: bread, cheese, cold chicken, and apples. "Your uncle's land has good water rights," he said as they ate. "That's valuable in California. Drought years can be hard." Sophia considered this, along with everything else she'd seen. "Do you think I could manage it? On my own, I mean?" Nash considered her question seriously. "It would be challenging," he acknowledged. "Running a place this size typically needs more than one pair of hands. But if you hired help for the heavier work, kept it focused on what you could manage, yes, I think you could make a go of it." His confidence warmed her. "I've never been afraid of hard work, and if I secure the teaching position in town, that would provide income while I learn about the property." "You're applying to teach?" Nash asked, seeming pleased by this information. Sophia explained her conversation with Mr. Whitman and the school board meeting scheduled for that afternoon. "It seems providential," she concluded. "If I can establish myself as a teacher, it would give me time to decide what's best for the property." "Sounds like a solid plan," Nash agreed. "Teaching in town, living out here, though the daily journey would be considerable." This was a practical concern Sophia hadn't fully considered. "I suppose I could take lodgings in town during the school week and come to the property on weekends until I'm more established." Nash nodded thoughtfully. "That might be wisest, at least initially. Winter travel can be difficult when the creeks rise." They finished their meal and spent another hour exploring the boundaries of the property. Sophia found herself increasingly drawn to this place, its beauty, its potential, the connection to the uncle she'd never known but whose careful stewardship was evident in every aspect of the homestead. As they prepared to return to Chico for her meeting with the school board, Sophia turned to Nash. "Thank you for bringing me here today. Seeing the property has made everything more real somehow." "You're welcome," he replied, his eyes meeting hers directly. "I'm glad you're pleased with it." "More than pleased," she admitted. "I feel connected to it already, as if it was waiting for me." A smile touched the corners of his mouth. "Land has a way of claiming people as much as people claim land." The return journey passed quickly, with Sophia's mind full of impressions and possibilities. Nash drove directly to the schoolhouse, where the board meeting would be held. "I wish you success with the board," he said as he helped her down from the wagon. "They'd be fortunate to have you." "Thank you again for everything, Mr. Nash," Sophia replied, suddenly realizing she didn't know when she might see him again. "Will you? That is, might I call on you if I have questions about the property?" "I'll be at the Carter Ranch about 5 miles west of town," he told her. "But I expect to be in Chico regularly. Perhaps I could call at the boarding house in a few days to hear how you're getting on." The suggestion brought a smile to Sophia's face. "I would like that very much." With a tip of his hat and a warm glance that lingered a moment longer than necessary, Nash took his leave. Sophia watched him go, a curious mixture of emotions stirring within her. Then, squaring her shoulders, she turned toward the schoolhouse to meet her future. The school board consisted of 5 members: the mayor, a banker, a prominent merchant, a minister, and a formidable older woman who had been the town's first teacher 20 years earlier. Mr. Whitman had kindly arranged the introduction, and Sophia found herself answering questions about her education, teaching experience, and methods of instruction. "We've had a considerable influx of families this past year," the mayor explained. "Our current teaching staff is overwhelmed. We need someone specifically for the younger children, ages 6 to 10. That was precisely my focus in Pennsylvania," Sophia assured them. "I believe strongly in fostering a love of learning from an early age." The former teacher, Mrs. Harrington, regarded Sophia with shrewd eyes. "These are frontier children, Miss Hayes. Many have had irregular schooling at best. How would you address the varying levels of preparation?" Sophia outlined her approach to assessing individual needs and grouping students accordingly, explaining techniques she had developed for managing a classroom with diverse abilities. Her passion for education was evident in her detailed responses. By the end of the interview, the board seemed impressed. They conferred briefly before the mayor addressed her again. "Miss Hayes, we would be pleased to offer you the position, beginning immediately. The term starts next Monday. The salary is $40 per month, with room and board your own responsibility." It was more than she had earned in Pennsylvania, and Sophia accepted gratefully. "Thank you for your confidence. I assure you, I will do my utmost to provide an excellent education for Chico's children." After signing the necessary papers and receiving a tour of the classroom that would be hers, Sophia walked back to the boarding house with a light step. In just 2 days, despite the robbery and her uncertain arrival, she had secured both employment and a place to stay while she sorted out her claim to her uncle's property. Mrs. Fletcher was delighted to hear her news. "Teaching is a respected profession here," she declared over the evening meal. "Gives you standing in the community right away." The other boarders offered congratulations and advice, especially Mr. Whitman, who was clearly pleased to have a colleague in residence. By the time Sophia retired to her room that night, she felt more settled than she would have thought possible so soon after her ordeal. The days that followed fell into a pattern of preparation. She wrote to her family's lawyer in Pennsylvania, explaining her situation and requesting he send documentation confirming her identity and inheritance. She visited her classroom daily, organizing materials and preparing lessons for the coming term. And with Mrs. Fletcher's help, she acquired the basics of a new wardrobe suitable for a schoolteacher, to be paid for from her first month's salary. Throughout this busy time, her thoughts often turned to Patrick Nash. True to his word, he called at the boarding house 3 days after their visit to the Hayes property. Mrs. Fletcher showed him to the parlor, where Sophia was reviewing a geography text. "Miss Hayes," he greeted her, hat in hand. "I hope I find you well." "Very well, Mr. Nash," she replied, setting aside her book. "Please sit down. I have news to share." He took a seat across from her, and Sophia recounted her success with the school board and her preparations for the term. "That's fine news indeed," Nash said, genuine pleasure in his voice. "Chico's gained an excellent teacher, I've no doubt." "And what of your position at the Carter Ranch?" Sophia inquired. Nash nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. "All arranged. I've spent these past days getting acquainted with the operation. It's a substantial spread, 3,000 acres, 800 head of cattle, and 20 hands under my supervision." "That sounds like considerable responsibility," Sophia observed, impressed. "It is, but it's work I know well." He hesitated, then added, "The position comes with a foreman's house on the property. Small, but well built." Something in his tone made Sophia glance up quickly, but his expression revealed nothing beyond casual information sharing. Their conversation turned to her plans for the Hayes property. Nash offered practical suggestions about maintenance and potential improvements, his knowledge of local conditions proving invaluable. "I was thinking," he said, as their visit drew to a close, "that I might accompany you to the property again on Saturday, if you're amenable. There are a few matters that should be attended to before winter comes, checking the roof, ensuring the chimney is clear, that sort of thing." Sophia felt a flutter of pleasure at the prospect. "That would be most kind of you, Mr. Nash. I would welcome your expertise." He stood, seeming almost reluctant to leave. "Saturday morning, then. I could call for you at 9. "I'll be ready," she assured him. After he departed, Sophia found herself contemplating the curious relationship developing between them. Patrick Nash was not a man given to unnecessary words or gestures, yet he had consistently gone out of his way to assist her since their first encounter. His manner was respectful, even formal at times, but she sensed a deeper interest behind his helpful demeanor. And she could not deny her own growing attraction to him, his quiet strength, his integrity, his knowledge of the land she was coming to love. There was something compelling about his presence that made her anticipate their next meeting with an eagerness that went beyond gratitude for his practical assistance. Saturday dawned clear and cooler, a hint of autumn in the air despite the lingering summer heat. Sophia dressed carefully in one of her new skirts and a practical blouse, suitable for a day at the property. Mrs. Fletcher provided a basket of provisions for their midday meal, her knowing smile suggesting she approved of the developing friendship. Nash arrived punctually with the wagon, and they set off for the Hayes homestead. The journey seemed shorter this time, filled with easy conversation about their respective weeks and plans. At the property, Nash set to work immediately, checking the roof for loose shingles, cleaning the chimney, and making minor repairs to the porch steps. Sophia busied herself inside, taking inventory of household items and making lists of necessities should she decide to take up residence. They shared the meal Mrs. Fletcher had packed on the porch, enjoying the view of the creek and the distant mountains. The easy companionship between them had deepened during their day of shared work, and Sophia found herself increasingly comfortable in Nash's presence. "I've been thinking," he said as they finished their meal, "about your situation with traveling between town and here." Sophia looked up, interested. "Yes, it's a consideration, especially once winter comes. The Carter Ranch has a light buggy they rarely use. Mr. Carter mentioned he'd be willing to sell it at a fair price. It would make your commute more manageable." Touched by his thoughtfulness, Sophia considered the suggestion. "That's very kind, but I'd need a horse as well." Nash nodded. "Your uncle kept a small stable." "There's still good grazing in the north pasture. A gentle mare wouldn't cost too much, and would serve you well." The practical planning gave substance to Sophia's tentative vision of dividing her time between teaching in town and living on the property. With Nash's guidance, the challenges seemed less daunting. "You've thought of everything," she said with genuine appreciation. A hint of color touched his cheekbones. Just practical matters. I know what it takes to make a place work." As the afternoon progressed, they completed the most pressing tasks. Nash showed Sophia how to operate the pump, explained the irrigation system for the garden, and pointed out boundary markers she should know. "Your uncle kept good records," he noted as they reviewed the property ledgers together at the kitchen table. "You can see his planting schedule here, and his accounts with the merchants in town." Sophia studied the neat columns of figures, impressed by her uncle's methodical approach. "He seems to have been quite self-sufficient." "Mostly," Nash agreed. "Sold wheat and some cattle each year, kept bees for honey, grew most of his own food. Simple life, but a good one from the looks of it." The sun was beginning to lower in the sky when they finally prepared to return to Chico. As Nash helped her into the wagon, their hands touched briefly, and Sophia felt a spark of awareness that had nothing to do with the practical matters they'd been discussing all day. The journey back was quieter, both perhaps reflecting on the day and what it had revealed about the possibilities ahead. As they neared the boarding house, Nash cleared his throat. "Miss Hayes, Sophia, I've enjoyed our time together these past days." The use of her given name startled her pleasantly. "As have I, Patrick." He seemed encouraged by her response. "I was wondering if you might permit me to call on you properly. Sunday after church, perhaps." The formal request, so at odds with the practical partnership that had characterized their relationship thus far, brought a warm flush to Sophia's cheeks. "I would like that very much." His smile transformed his face, softening the lines around his eyes. "Until tomorrow, then." That night, as Sophia prepared for bed, she found herself humming softly a habit her mother had always said indicated contentment. Despite the inauspicious beginning to her California adventure, she now faced the future with growing optimism. She had employment, prospects for establishing her claim to the property, and most unexpectedly the beginnings of what might become a meaningful relationship with a man whose character she had come to admire deeply. Sunday morning found Sophia attending services at Chico's Methodist Church, alongside Mrs. Fletcher and the other boarders. The congregation was larger than she had expected, reflecting the town's growth, and she was introduced to many who would soon be her pupils' parents. Patrick was there as well, seated toward the back, his tall frame easy to spot. He nodded respectfully when their eyes met, and Sophia felt a curious flutter of anticipation at the thought of his coming call. After the service, they exchanged brief greetings among the departing worshippers. "I'll call at 2 if that's convenient," he said quietly. "I'll look forward to it," she replied, aware of Mrs. Fletcher's approving glance back at the boarding house. Sophia changed from her church dress to a simpler afternoon gown in a becoming shade of blue. She had just finished arranging her hair when Mrs. Fletcher knocked at her door. "Mr. Nash is here, dear. I've shown him to the parlor." The landlady's eyes twinkled with undisguised interest. "He's brought flowers. Not many men think of such niceties these days." Indeed, when Sophia entered the parlor, Patrick stood holding a modest bouquet of late summer blooms. "From Mrs. Carter's garden," he explained, offering them somewhat shyly. "She insisted I shouldn't call empty-handed." "They're lovely," Sophia said, genuinely touched. "Thank you, Mrs." Fletcher provided a vase, and once the flowers were arranged, she discreetly withdrew, though Sophia had no doubt she would find reasons to pass by the open parlor door occasionally during their visit. For the first time since they'd met, there was a certain awkwardness between them. The easy camaraderie of their workday at the property had been replaced by the more formal constraints of a proper social call. "You look very nice today," Patrick offered, breaking the momentary silence. Sophia smiled, appreciating his directness. "Thank you. You're looking rather distinguished yourself." He had dressed carefully in what were clearly his Sunday best clean dark trousers, a crisp white shirt, and a well-worn but immaculate coat. His hair was neatly combed, his face freshly shaven. "I was thinking," he said after they had exchanged pleasantries about the church service, "that you might enjoy seeing a bit more of Chico and the surrounding area, now that you're to be living here." "I would like that," Sophia agreed. "I've seen so little beyond the route between the boarding house and the school. Perhaps next Saturday, if the weather holds, we might take a drive up to Bidwell Park. It's quite beautiful, especially as the leaves are beginning to turn." The suggestion of another outing pleased Sophia immensely. "That sounds wonderful." Their conversation flowed more easily after that, covering topics from the approaching school term to Patrick's work at the Carter Ranch. Sophia found herself drawn to his straightforward manner and thoughtful observations about life in the growing community. "Chico's changing," he noted at one point. "When I first passed through 10 years ago, it was barely more than a trading post. Now there's talk of the railroad coming through, a college being established." "You welcome the changes?" Sophia asked, curious about his perspective. Patrick considered this. "Growth is inevitable, I suppose, and some changes bring better schools, more opportunities for folks to build a decent life." He paused, a shadow crossing his face. "But there's a cost too. The open country gets fenced and divided, the old ways give way to new." "You prefer the open country," Sophia observed. He nodded, seeming pleased that she understood. "Always have. There's a freedom to it that's hard to find elsewhere, but a man has to adapt or be left behind." Sophia sensed there was more to his philosophy than he was expressing, a deeper consideration of his place in a changing world. It made her all the more curious about this quiet, thoughtful man whose path had so unexpectedly crossed with hers. Their visit lasted the better part of 2 hours, ending only when Mrs. Fletcher announced that Sunday supper would be served soon. Patrick rose reluctantly. "I've enjoyed our conversation, Sophia." "As have I," she replied sincerely, "and I look forward to our outing next Saturday." He hesitated at the door, seeming on the verge of saying something more, then simply nodded. "Until Saturday, then." The week that followed was a whirlwind of activity as Sophia began her teaching duties. 28 children between the ages of 6 and 10 now occupied her days, their energy and curiosity both challenging and rewarding. By the end of the first week, she had established routines, assessed their varying abilities, and begun to know each child as an individual. She thought often of Patrick during these busy days, recalling his steadfast support and practical assistance. Twice, he sent notes inquiring about her welfare and confirming their planned outing. The simple messages, written in a strong, clear hand, brought a smile to her face amid the demands of her new position. Saturday dawned clear and pleasantly cool. Sophia dressed in a practical riding skirt and jacket, anticipating their drive to Bidwell Park. Patrick arrived promptly at 10, driving a handsome buggy pulled by a matched pair of bays. "Mr. Carter insisted I take his personal rig for the occasion," he explained as he helped Sophia up to the seat. "Said a lady deserves better than a farm wagon for an outing." The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched Sophia. "Please convey my thanks to Mr. Carter. This is lovely." They set off through town and then north along a well-traveled road. Patrick pointed out landmarks and shared stories of the area's development as they drove. Sophia found herself increasingly comfortable in his company, their conversation flowing easily from topic to topic. Bidwell Park proved to be even more beautiful than Patrick had described, a vast expanse of natural woodland along Big Chico Creek, with towering oaks and sycamores beginning to show autumn colors. They left the buggy at a designated area and walked along a path that followed the creek's winding course. General Bidwell donated this land to the town last year, Patrick explained as they strolled. His wife's idea, they say. She believes in preserving natural beauty for future generations. How fortunate for Chico, Sophia remarked, admiring the play of light through the leaves overhead. Few towns have such a magnificent park. They found a pleasant spot beside the creek for their picnic lunch. Patrick spread a blanket on the grassy bank, and Sophia arranged the provisions Mrs. Fletcher had prepared for them. As they ate, Patrick asked about her first week of teaching. Sophia found herself sharing stories of her pupils' antics and insights with an enthusiasm that made him smile. "You found your calling," he observed. "It shows in your face when you speak of them." "I do love teaching," she acknowledged. "Seeing a child grasp a new concept, watching their confidence grow, there's nothing quite like it. And the Hayes property. Have you given more thought to how you'll manage both?" Sophia nodded. "I've decided to stay at the boarding house during the school week for now, at least until I'm more established. But I'd like to spend weekends at the property, perhaps making small improvements over time." "A sensible plan," Patrick approved. "The property won't suffer from limited attention in the short term, especially if basic maintenance is kept up." Their conversation turned to practical matters. The buggy Mr. Carter was willing to sell, potential sources for a suitable horse, arrangements for checking on the property during the week. Through it all, Sophia was struck by Patrick's thoughtful consideration of her circumstances and his genuine desire to help her succeed. As they were preparing to leave their picnic spot, a rider approached along the path. He reined in his horse when he spotted them, and Sophia was startled to see Patrick's posture stiffen slightly. "Nash," the rider greeted him, his tone neutral but his eyes sharp beneath the brim of his hat. "Didn't expect to see you here." "Reeves," Patrick acknowledged with a curt nod. "Miss Hayes, may I present Deputy Sheriff James Reeves. Deputy, this is Miss Sophia Hayes, Chico's newest schoolteacher." The deputy tipped his hat to Sophia. "Madam, welcome to Chico." "Thank you, Deputy Reeves," she replied politely. "Any word on the Patterson gang?" Patrick asked, his tone carefully casual. Reeves shook his head. "Nothing solid. They've gone to ground for now." His eyes shifted to Sophia. "You were in the stage that was robbed last week, weren't you?" "Yes," she confirmed. "They took everything, including the deed to my uncle's property." The deputy's expression remained impassive. "Sorry to hear that. Sheriff's doing what he can, but those boys know the back country better than most." "So I understand," Sophia replied, sensing an undercurrent to the conversation she didn't fully comprehend. Reeves turned his attention back to Patrick. "Carter seems pleased with your work so far." "Glad to hear it," Patrick replied evenly. The deputy studied him a moment longer, then touched the brim of his hat. "Miss Hayes, enjoy your stay in Chico. Nash, see you around." He rode off, leaving a curious tension in his wake. Sophia glanced at Patrick, noting the tight line of his jaw. "Is everything all right?" she asked as they gathered their picnic things. Patrick's expression relaxed with visible effort. "Fine. Reeves and I have some history, that's all. Nothing to concern yourself with." Though curious, Sophia didn't press the matter. They returned to the buggy and set off toward Chico, the encounter with the deputy temporarily dampening the easy mood of their outing. As they approached town, however, Patrick seemed to shake off his discomfort. "I was thinking," he said, glancing at Sophia, "that I might help you move some of your things to the Hayes place tomorrow if you're planning to start spending weekends there." The suggestion brightened Sophia's spirits considerably. "I would appreciate that very much. I've acquired a few necessities I'd like to install in the house." "I'll call for you after church then," he proposed. We can make a day of it." By the time they reached the boarding house, the encounter with Deputy Reeves had receded, and Sophia was once again caught up in the simple pleasure of Patrick's company. As he helped her down from the buggy, his hands lingered briefly at her waist, and their eyes met in a moment of unspoken connection. "Thank you for a wonderful day," Sophia said softly. "The pleasure was mine," Patrick replied, his voice equally low. For a moment, Sophia thought he might say something more, but he simply squeezed her hands gently before releasing them. "Until tomorrow." That evening at supper, Mrs. Fletcher was full of questions about their outing, which Sophia answered with a blend of enthusiasm and discretion. The landlady's obvious approval of the developing relationship was echoed by the other boarders, who had come to regard Sophia as one of their own. "Mr. Nash seems a fine gentleman," Mrs. Graves observed. "Quiet but with substance to him." "Indeed," Mrs. Fletcher agreed meaningfully. "The sort who knows his own mind and isn't afraid of commitment." Sophia felt herself blushing under their knowing gazes, but couldn't deny the flutter of anticipation she felt at the thought of seeing Patrick again the next day. Sunday followed a similar pattern to the previous week: church services in the morning, followed by Patrick's arrival at the boarding house in the early afternoon. This time, however, he came with the wagon rather than the buggy, ready to transport Sophia's accumulated possessions to the Hayes property. With Mrs. Fletcher's help, Sophia had acquired basic household necessities: linens, cookware, pantry staples, and a few modest decorative items to make the house more comfortable for her weekend stays. These were carefully loaded into the wagon, along with a trunk containing clothing suitable for country living. The journey to the property was filled with companionable conversation and planning. Patrick spoke of the coming autumn work on the Carter ranch: the gathering of cattle from summer pastures, preparations for winter feeding. "Busiest time of the year," he explained, "but necessary work." "Will it prevent your visits to town?" Sophia asked, trying to keep her tone casual despite the importance of his answer to her. Patrick glanced at her, a slight smile touching his lips. "Nothing could prevent that," he said simply. "I'll make time." The quiet assurance in his voice sent a warm current through Sophia's veins. Though neither had spoken explicitly of their growing feelings, this tacit acknowledgment of his intention to continue seeing her felt significant. At the Hayes property, they worked together efficiently to unload the wagon and arrange Sophia's possessions. Fresh linens on the beds, new curtains at the windows, and a vase of autumn wildflowers on the kitchen table transformed the house from an empty shell to a welcoming home. As the sun began to set, they sat together on the front porch, reluctant to end the day despite the need to return to Chico before dark. "It feels different now," Sophia observed, looking out over the property. "Less like my uncle's place and more like mine." Patrick nodded understandingly. "That's how it should be. Land changes hands, but it continues. Your uncle would be pleased, I think, to see you making it your own." Sophia turned to him, struck by the quiet certainty in his voice. "Thank you, Patrick, not just for today, but for everything since we met. I don't know what I would have done without your guidance." "You'd have managed," he said with a confidence that warmed her. "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for." He hesitated, then added more softly, "But I'm glad our paths crossed when they did." In that moment, with the golden light of the setting sun illuminating his features, Sophia realized with sudden clarity that she was falling in love with Patrick Nash. The recognition was both exhilarating and terrifying, a vulnerability she hadn't anticipated when she set out for California to claim her inheritance. Whether Patrick sensed her revelation or simply followed his own inclination, he reached out and gently took her hand in his. "Sophia," he began, his voice deeper than usual. "I know we haven't known each other long, but I find myself thinking of you even when we're apart." Sophia's heart quickened at his words. "I feel the same," she admitted softly. His fingers tightened around hers. "I'd like to continue calling on you with your permission, not just as a friend or guide, but with the intention of courting you properly." The formal request, so characteristic of his straightforward nature, brought a smile to Sophia's lips. "I would like that very much, Patrick." He released a breath, as if he'd been uncertain of her answer. "Good, that's good." The simplicity of his response made her affection for him deepen further. Here was a man without pretense or guile, honest in word and deed. In the short time she had known him, he had demonstrated character and integrity in every action. As the last light faded from the sky, they reluctantly prepared for the return journey to Chico. Patrick helped Sophia into the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. The ride back was filled with a new awareness, a sense of possibility stretching before them like the road ahead. At the boarding house, Patrick escorted Sophia to the door. Before they parted, he took both her hands in his. "When might I see you again?" he asked, his voice low. "I'm free on Wednesday evening," Sophia replied. "If that suits you." He nodded. "Wednesday, then. Perhaps we could attend the town band concert in the square." "I'd enjoy that," she assured him. For a moment, it seemed he might lean down to kiss her cheek, but instead he simply squeezed her hands gently before releasing them. "Good night, Sophia. Sleep well." "Good night, Patrick," she replied, watching as he returned to the wagon and drove away into the night. As autumn deepened in the Sacramento Valley, Sophia's life fell into a pleasant rhythm. Weekdays were devoted to her pupils, whose progress brought her genuine satisfaction. Weekends were spent at the Hayes property, gradually making it truly her own. And through it all, Patrick was a steady presence, his courtship proceeding with the same quiet intentionality that characterized everything he did. They attended socials and concerts together, shared meals at the boarding house under Mrs. Fletcher's approving eye, and spent countless hours at the Hayes property, where Patrick's practical knowledge complemented Sophia's growing attachment to the land. In late October, a letter finally arrived from Pennsylvania. Sophia's family lawyer had provided documentation confirming her identity and inheritance, along with a formal statement regarding the robbery. With these papers in hand, she visited the land office, where her claim to the Hayes property was at last officially recognized. "Congratulations, Miss Hayes," the clerk said, stamping the final document. "The property is now legally yours." That evening she shared the news with Patrick over supper at the boarding house. His genuine pleasure in her success touched her deeply. "We should celebrate," he declared. "Perhaps a special outing this weekend." Sophia agreed readily, curious what he might have planned. When Saturday arrived, he appeared at the boarding house with the Carter buggy again, but refused to tell her their destination. "It's a surprise," he said, eyes twinkling with unusual mischief. "You'll have to trust me." Their journey took them east into the foothills, following winding roads that climbed steadily upward. The autumn colors were at their peak, the landscape ablaze with gold and crimson. After about an hour, Patrick turned onto a narrow track that Sophia hadn't noticed. It led through a grove of pines to a clearing overlooking the entire Sacramento Valley. The view was breathtaking. Chico spread out below them, the Sacramento River winding through the vast plain, and in the far distance, the Coast Range floating like blue shadows on the horizon. "Oh, Patrick," Sophia breathed, taking in the panorama. "It's magnificent." He helped her from the buggy, clearly pleased by her reaction. "Found this spot years ago driving cattle through these hills. Thought you might appreciate it." "It's the most beautiful view I've ever seen," she said sincerely. Patrick had prepared a special picnic for the occasion, not the usual simple fare, but delicacies from Chico's finest establishments. Fried chicken, fresh bread, apple tarts, and even a bottle of wine to toast her accomplishment. As they enjoyed the meal, Sophia found herself reflecting on the remarkable journey that had brought her to this moment. From the terrifying robbery to her present contentment had been a path of unexpected twists, with Patrick as her steady guide through it all. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, noticing her contemplative expression. Sophia smiled. "I was just thinking how differently things might have turned out if you hadn't come along that day after the robbery." Patrick considered this. "Life has a way of bringing people together when they need each other," he said simply. "I'm grateful it was me who found you on that road." There was something in his tone that suggested he had more to say, and Sophia waited, sensing the importance of the moment. Patrick set aside his plate and turned to face her directly. "Sophia, these past weeks have been the happiest I can remember. Getting to know you, watching you build your life here, it's made me see possibilities I'd stopped looking for." Sophia's heart began to beat faster as he reached for her hand. "I know it hasn't been long," he continued, his voice deep with emotion, "and you might think it too soon, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life." He paused, his blue eyes holding hers steadily. "I love you, Sophia Hayes, and if you do me the honor of becoming my wife, I promise to spend every day making sure you never regret it." Though she had begun to hope for such a declaration, the actual words left Sophia momentarily speechless. Patrick watched her face anxiously, his usually confident demeanor replaced by vulnerability. "Patrick," she finally managed, her voice thick with emotion, "I love you too. Yes, I'll marry you gladly, wholeheartedly, yes." The joy that transformed his features was something Sophia knew she would remember all her life. He gathered her into his arms with uncharacteristic impulsiveness, holding her close as if afraid she might vanish. When he kissed her, it was with a tender reverence that spoke volumes about the man he was, gentle yet passionate, restrained yet deeply feeling. Sophia responded with the full measure of her own newly discovered love, secure in the knowledge that she had found not just a husband but a true partner for the life she was building. When they finally drew apart, Patrick reached into his pocket and produced a small box. "This was my mother's," he said, opening it to reveal a simple gold band set with a single pearl. "I've carried it with me since she passed, waiting for the right person to give it to. I've never doubted that person is you." With trembling fingers, Sophia allowed him to slip the ring onto her hand. It fit as if made for her, the pearl glowing softly in the autumn sunlight. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "I'll treasure it always." They spent the remainder of the afternoon making plans for their future together. Patrick had been saving for years and had accumulated enough to expand the Hayes homestead if Sophia was willing to make it their permanent home. "The foreman's position at Carter's comes with a good salary," he explained, "and your teaching income would allow us to improve the property gradually. In time, we could build a larger house, increase the cattle herd, perhaps plant an orchard." Sophia was touched by how carefully he had considered their future together. "I'd like that very much," she told him. "The Hayes place already feels like home to me. Making it ours together would be perfect." As the sun began to set, painting the valley below in shades of gold and rose, they reluctantly prepared to return to Chico. The journey back was filled with shared dreams and practical planning, their hands often finding each other's, despite the need for Patrick to manage the reins. At the boarding house, Mrs. Fletcher's delight at their news was evident in her immediate embrace of Sophia and her warm handshake for Patrick. "I knew from the first day you two were meant for each other," she declared. When shall the wedding be? They had discussed this on the drive back and agreed on a date just before Christmas. December 23rd, Patrick told her. We thought a simple ceremony in the church if Reverend Tilson is agreeable. Perfect timing, Mrs. Fletcher approved. The school will be on holiday, and the worst of the winter rains usually hold off until January. News of their engagement spread quickly through Chico's close-knit community. Sophia's pupils were especially excited, peppering her with questions about her cowboy beau and whether she would continue teaching after she was married. Yes, she assured them firmly. Mrs. Nash will still be your teacher. The name sounded strange and wonderful on her lips, a new identity she would soon assume, linked forever to the man who had given her his horse and walked beside her when she was most vulnerable. The weeks leading to the wedding passed in a flurry of preparation. Sophia divided her time between teaching, readying the Hayes house for their life together, and creating a simple wedding dress with Mrs. Fletcher's help. Patrick, meanwhile, arranged for improvements to the property, repairs to the barn, additional furniture for the house, and the purchase of a gentle mare for Sophia's use. They saw each other often during this time, their stolen moments together growing more precious as their wedding day approached. Patrick's courtship, now officially sanctioned by their engagement, remained respectful but increasingly affectionate. Each parting was more difficult than the last, both counting the days until they would no longer need to say goodbye. On the afternoon before their wedding, they made a final visit to the Hayes property, soon to be the Nash homestead. A light rain had fallen earlier, leaving the air fresh and the hills a vibrant green with new growth. It looks different in winter, Sophia observed as they stood on the porch, surveying what would soon be their home. More alive somehow. Patrick nodded, his arm around her waist. That's California for you. Summer sleeps, winter wakes. He kissed her temple gently. This time tomorrow we'll be husband and wife. The wonder in his voice echoed Sophia's own feelings. It hardly seems possible, she murmured. When that stagecoach was robbed, I thought all my hopes for a new beginning were destroyed. And I never expected that giving up my horse that day would lead me to everything I never knew I wanted, Patrick replied. Funny how life works sometimes. They lingered at the property until the winter sun began to set, reluctant to part for their last night as separate individuals. Tomorrow would unite them not just in name but in purpose, their lives intertwined as they built a future on this land that had brought them together. December 23rd dawned clear and cool, a perfect California winter day. Sophia prepared at the boarding house with Mrs. Fletcher's assistance, her wedding dress a simple creation of ivory silk with lace at the collar and cuffs. Her dark hair was arranged in a coronet of braids, adorned with sprigs of rosemary from Mrs. Fletcher's garden. For remembrance and fidelity, the landlady explained as she tucked the herbs in place. An old tradition from my grandmother's time. The small church was filled with well-wishers, Sophia's pupils and their parents, fellow teachers, boarders from Mrs. Fletcher's and ranch hands from the Carter spread. Patrick waited at the altar, tall and handsome in a new suit, his face solemn with the weight of the moment, until he caught sight of Sophia walking toward him. Then his expression transformed to one of such joy and wonder that tears sprang to her eyes. The ceremony was brief but deeply meaningful, their vows spoken with clear voices that carried to the back of the church. When Reverend Tilson pronounced them husband and wife, Patrick's kiss was tender but possessed a new certainty, the seal of a covenant made before God and their community. The celebration afterward was held at the town hall, decorated with evergreens and winter berries by Sophia's pupils. There was music and dancing, generous food provided by the townsfolk, and much good-natured teasing of the newlyweds. Through it all, Patrick kept Sophia close, his hand often finding hers as if reassuring himself of her presence. As the afternoon waned, they slipped away to begin their married life at the homestead. Patrick had arranged for a neighbor to light the fires earlier in the day, so they arrived to find the house warm and welcoming. A wreath of evergreens hung on the door, a wedding gift from Mrs. Carter, and inside, the simple rooms had been transformed with Sophia's touch into a true home. That evening, as they sat before the fire in the main room, Sophia nestled against her husband's side, a profound contentment filling her heart. "Happy, Mrs. Nash?" Patrick asked softly, his arm secure around her shoulders. "Completely," she assured him, tilting her face up for his kiss. "I never imagined when I set out for California that I would find not just a property but a home, and a husband who is everything I could have wished for. And I never thought that giving up my horse to a stranded woman would lead me to the love of my life," he replied, his voice husky with emotion. "Best decision I ever made." Outside, a gentle rain began to fall, pattering on the roof and windows. Inside, the fire crackled warmly, casting golden light over the couple as they began their life together. From inauspicious beginnings, a robbery, a chance encounter on a dusty road had grown a love as enduring as the land that had brought them together. And in years to come, when their children asked how they met, Patrick would always begin the story the same way. "Your mother's stagecoach was robbed, and she was stranded on the road to Chico. I gave her my horse and walked beside her all the way to Miller's Creek. Best journey of my life, for it led me to her." Epilogue. 5 years later, the Nash homestead flourished under Patrick and Sophia's care. The modest house had been expanded to accommodate their growing family: 4-year-old Samuel, named for Sophia's uncle, and 2-year-old Elizabeth, who had her father's blue eyes and her mother's determination. Sophia continued teaching at the Chico school, though now only 3 days a week. Patrick's position as foreman at the Carter Ranch provided stability, while their careful management of the homestead had increased its productivity. A new orchard, expanded cattle herd, an improved irrigation system had transformed the property into one of the most prosperous small holdings in the area. On this particular evening, the 5th anniversary of their wedding, they sat on the expanded porch, watching their children play in the yard as the sun set over the Sacramento Valley. "You ever think about that day we met?" Sophia asked, her head resting on Patrick's shoulder. "Often," he admitted with a smile. "Best day of my life, even if it didn't start that way for you." "I don't know," she mused. "Being robbed was terrifying, but it led me to you. I'd say that makes it one of my best days, too, in retrospect." Patrick kissed her forehead tenderly. Who would have thought that a stagecoach robbery could lead to all this? He gestured to their home, their children, the life they had built together. Life has a way of bringing people together when they need each other. Sophia quoted his words from years ago. "I'm grateful it was you who found me on that road." As darkness fell and they gathered their sleepy children to go inside, both silently gave thanks for the twists of fate that had brought them together on that dusty California road 5 years before a robbed stagecoach, a stranded woman, a cowboy with a horse to share, and a journey that had led them home.